Thanks to its larger 1-inch sensor, the Mini 5 Pro raises the bar in terms of video quality compared to previous models of the DJI lightweight line. However, to get the best results, it is crucial to expose correctly. In this video, I will show how to achieve the best exposure when shooting footage. The most important factor to consider is the choice of light conditions. The central hour of the sunny day are to be avoided, as the shadows are very harsh and the contrast too strong. For centuries, painters and photography have tried to control the quality of the light in their studios by carefully adjusting the position of the windows and the distance from walls. In more recent times, reflectors and diffusers have been widely used to avoid strong highlights and to soften the shadows. The best light conditions for video with drones are during the 2 hours before and after sunrise or sunset. Another possibility is when the sun is covered by cloud, acting like big softboxes. The idea is to reduce the dynamic range, which is the difference in luminosity between highlights and shadows. My favorite time is about half an hour after sunset, with the last twilight acting as a fade light and the artificial lights as the main source. The histogram is the only tool I use for exposure. It tells us a lot about the lighting condition of a scene. When the bar touches the right edge, the image is overexposed. This must be avoided at all costs, as barred highlights cannot be recovered while editing. I always make sure to leave a gap between the last bar to the right and the right edge of the histogram to preserve the highlights. When a few bars touch the left edge, the shadows will be dark, but can still be recovered in post-processing up to a certain extent. But when too many bars are clustered against the left edge, the shadows will be too dark. When the histogram has most of the bars in the central part, with gaps on both the right and left sides, the image has low contrast. These are ideal conditions and correspond to the best hour of the days mentioned earlier. It will be simple to add a bit of contrast while editing for excellent results. When the bars touch both the right and left edges of the histogram, we are in a high dynamic range scene, generally when the camera is pointing in the direction of the sun. Those are the most difficult situations. It is better to leave a small gap to the right to preserve the highlights. The shadows will be very dark, but we can try to recover them at least partially with some advanced post-processing. For this reason, beginners should avoid shooting footage in the direction of the sun. With footage, we cannot use a shutter speed value lower than the frame rate. For example, at 25 frames per second, we cannot use a value slower than 1/25 of a second. Beginners generally start by using auto exposure. However, there are two main reasons why it is better to get used to shooting in manual exposure. With auto exposure, if the overall luminosity of a scene changes, the software will detect it and adjust the exposure value. This will lead to a noticeable shift of luminosity in the clip, an evident sign of amateur footage. For similar reasons, with video I always suggest using manual white balance. As in auto mode, the difference of luminosity during a clip can cause color shifts. Another reason to use manual exposure is to control the exposure parameters. Professional videographers tend to use a specific shutter speed based on the frame rate. 1/50th of a second at 24 or 25 frames per second, or 1/60th at 30 frames per second. This is known as the 180-degree rule, and it is more important when filming close to the ground or when the scene contains elements in motion, to optimize motion blur. However, when shooting landscape videos with a drone at a high altitude and without element in motion, the 180-degree rule is not crucial. By tapping on the icon on the right, we access manual mode, labeled Pro. Then, tapping the area of the values slightly to the left, we access the exposure window. The Mini5 Pro has a fixed aperture, so the only values to select are ISO and shutter speed. We can set this value independently. The value at the bottom cannot be modified. It displays the luminosity resulting from the value chosen above compared to the optimal exposure computed by the software. I prefer to see a slightly negative value to avoid overexposure. It is possible to set the ISO base value 100 for best quality whenever possible. However, the Mini5 Pro can handle higher ISO values without any noticeable loss of quality. To use a specific shutter speed value with different light conditions, ND filters are needed. In the description we will find links to the one I recommend. In auto mode, the exposure is set by the software. We can only access the EV value to adjust the overall luminosity. When the camera moves, the exposure values are automatically adjusted to maintain a constant exposure, but the individual ISO and shutter speed values are not shown. With previous models of the DJI lightweight line, I never used auto exposure, for reasons explained earlier. However, the Mini5 Pro boasts a dual native ISO mode. When using auto or semi-auto exposure, according to DJI, the Mini5 Pro records footage at two different ISO values and blends them to achieve up to 14 stop dynamic range, which is especially useful in high dynamic range and low light situations. It works similarly to HDR photos, with light taken from the lowest exposure and shadows from the highest. Beginners can simply set the exposure to auto to benefit from this feature. However, it is possible to use the semi-auto mode to control the shutter speed value. We can set manual exposure and then, in the exposure window, tap the ISO icon, which will turn yellow. We can now specify the desired shutter speed value, while the program will compute the optimal ISO. This method is very simple to use and delivers excellent results, maintaining plenty of detail in the shadows. The only downside is that some annoying shift in brightness may appear when the luminosity changes. For this reason, it is suggested to maintain a constant flight direction during each move. Click on this link to watch my video about photography with the Mini5 Pro. And don't forget to hit the like button if you find this video interesting. Thank you.